"Face down, you bastard," the officer screamed, slamming the jogger onto pavement. Cold steel bit into his wrists as handcuffs clicked tight. They had no idea who they'd just brutalized. The scream, filled with malice and contempt, shattered the late afternoon peace of the Maple Line Street. It was followed by a heavy thud as a man's body was slammed mercilessly onto the cold concrete sidewalk. Sharp pain shot through his spine and shoulders, but he gritted his teeth, holding back a groan to retain a final shred of dignity. A knee wrapped in tactical fabric drove hard into the middle of his back, forcing the air from his lungs. He smelled damp earth and fallen leaves. Cold steel bit into his wrists as handcuffs were ratcheted tight, breaking the skin and leaving crimson marks. Just moments before, he was a man enjoying a routine jog through his own neighborhood. Now, he was treated like a dangerous criminal, pinned to the ground on the very street where he'd waved to neighbors for years. The officer, a young white man named Johnson with aggression blazing in his eyes, stood over him, one boot pressed against his back, a Glock pointed downward. This was not a mistake or misunderstanding. It was a naked manifestation of racism and abuse of power. Behind curtains and windows, neighbors peered out in shock. Mrs. Chen from across the street had her phone out, recording everything. The Martinez family's teenage son live-streamed from their front porch, his commentary filled with disbelief. "This is insane, guys. They're literally beating up someone in broad daylight on Maple Avenue." The man on the ground, enduring this public humiliation, regulated his breathing against the pain. His military training kicked in, assess the situation, control emotions, wait for the right moment. But the burning humiliation was almost worse than the physical pain. He could hear car doors slamming as more people stopped to watch the spectacle. "Stop resisting!" Brooks, the second officer, yelled, though the man hadn't moved a muscle. The young officer seemed nervous, constantly adjusting his grip on his weapon, trying to match his partner's aggressive energy. Johnson pressed his knee deeper, enjoying the power. "You picked the wrong neighborhood to case, buddy. We protect good people here from scum like you." The words hit like physical blows. The man's jaw clenched, but he remained still. Years of commanding respect through quiet authority had taught him that true power often came from restraint. But every fiber of his being wanted to show these boys what real authority looked like. A small crowd had gathered now. Someone called out, "Hey, isn't that Sam?" from the big house on the corner. But Johnson whirled around, pointing his weapon toward the crowd. "Back off. All of you. This is police business." His voice cracked slightly, betraying his inexperience and fear. The man on the ground filed away every detail, every word, every face, every witness. His photographic memory, honed through decades of military briefings, captured it all. These officers had just made the biggest mistake of their careers, and they had no idea. Blood trickled from where the handcuffs cut into his wrists. His navy blue jogging suit was torn and dirty. But beneath the physical degradation, his mind remained sharp and focused. He was already 3 steps ahead, calculating the consequences these young men would face. "What's your name, tough guy?" Johnson snarled, leaning down close enough that spittle hit the man's ear. "Cat got your tongue." The man said nothing yet. He was waiting. Timing was everything in strategy, whether in military operations or in moments like this. He would speak when it would have maximum impact. Brooks kicked at his feet. "Answer when you're spoken to." Still, the man remained silent, his breathing steady despite the knee crushing into his back. Around them, more phones appeared. The incident was spreading across social media in real time. Hashtag Maple Avenue abuse was already trending locally. Johnson's radio crackled, but he ignored it, too caught up in his power trip. "You know what I think? I think you're exactly the kind of criminal that's been breaking into houses around here. Yeah, you fit the description perfectly." "What description?" The man wondered grimly. "Black and breathing." The autumn sun cast long shadows across the scene. What should have been a peaceful Tuesday evening jog had become a viral moment that would change lives forever. The man on the ground knew it. The officers didn't. Not yet. But they would soon learn that some mistakes cannot be undone, and some people should never be underestimated based on appearance alone. The reckoning was coming. 30 minutes earlier, the day had been beautiful. In a spacious colonial home in Georgetown's most prestigious neighborhood, Rear Admiral Samuel "Sam" Washington, commander of the U.S. Navy's Third Fleet, was savoring a precious day of shore leave. After 6 months deployed in the Pacific overseeing carrier operations, the simple act of jogging through tree-lined streets felt like pure luxury. At 54, Sam's 6 feet 4 inches frame still carried the disciplined bearing of his Naval Academy days. His morning had started with his usual routine, reviewing classified briefings over coffee, a video call with his wife Commander Sarah Washington who was stationed in Norfolk, and catching up on correspondence from his staff. The afternoon jog was his meditation, his way of transitioning from the weight of command to simply being a neighbor. He wore his favorite navy blue Nike running gear and wireless AirPods, looking indistinguishable from any other affluent middle-aged professional trying to stay fit. Nothing about his appearance suggested he commanded 40,000 sailors and a battle group worth billions of dollars. Nothing indicated that foreign admirals knew his name, that Pentagon officials sought his counsel, or that the president had personally decorated him twice for classified operations. The Georgetown neighborhood suited him perfectly. Tree-lined streets with historic charm, neighbors who valued privacy, and proximity to the Naval Observatory where he often attended briefings. He'd lived at 847 Maple Avenue for 8 years, in a brick colonial he'd purchased after his promotion to Rear Admiral. His neighbors knew him as Sam, the quiet military man who traveled frequently, maintained an immaculate yard, and always waved politely during his evening jogs. Mrs. Chen across the street often chatted with him about her grandson's interest in Naval Academy. The Martinez family next door appreciated how he'd helped their teenager with college applications, writing recommendation letters that carried the weight of his rank without ever mentioning it. To them, he was simply the helpful neighbor with an impressive vocabulary and bearing that suggested leadership. Sam's study walls displayed a lifetime of service, commendations from 3 combat deployments, photos with 4 different presidents, certificates from staff colleges, and a silver star from his days as a young officer. But in his jogging clothes, he was invisible in the way that successful black professionals often were, either ignored entirely or viewed with suspicion depending on the observer's mindset. His route was always the same: out the front door, left on Maple Avenue, down to the park, around the pond, then back through the residential streets. He'd done this run hundreds of times, nodding to dog walkers, waving to children, occasionally stopping to chat with neighbors. It was his sanctuary, his small piece of normal life carved out from the enormous responsibilities of his rank. Today should have been perfect. The autumn air was crisp, the leaves were turning brilliant colors, and he had 3 more days of leave before returning to Norfolk. His promotion to Vice Admiral was pending Senate confirmation, another step up in a career that had exceeded every dream his younger self had dared to imagine. He was thinking about dinner plans, maybe calling his brother in Atlanta, when the police cruiser appeared. The transformation from peaceful civilian to suspected criminal happened in seconds, reminding him sharply that no amount of rank, education, or service could completely shield him from the reality of being a black man in America. The uniform protected him on military bases. The stars on his shoulder commanded respect in the Pentagon. But in a jogging suit on a civilian street, he was just another black man who someone had decided looked suspicious. The Montgomery County Police cruiser screeched to a halt beside him with unnecessary drama, tires squealing against asphalt. 2 young white officers emerged with the swagger of men who'd watched too many police procedurals and not enough sensitivity training videos. The driver was Officer Johnson, maybe 26, with a crew cut and the kind of aggressive energy that suggested he'd been picked on in high school and was now overcompensating. His partner, Officer Brooks, was shorter and stockier, with nervous eyes that kept darting around as if expecting trouble to materialize from the peaceful residential street. "Hey! Stop right there!" Johnson barked, his hand already resting on his weapon. His voice carried the artificial authority of someone trying to sound more experienced than he was. Sam calmly paused his jog, removing his AirPods with the fluid motion of someone accustomed to being interrupted by subordinates. "Good afternoon, officers. Is there something I can help you with?" His voice was deep, measured, and carried the unconscious command presence that came from years of addressing rooms full of military leaders. It was the voice that had briefed generals, commanded thousands, and delivered orders that moved ships across oceans. Johnson's eyes narrowed, clearly irritated by Sam's composure and articulateness. "We received multiple reports of a suspicious individual casing houses in this neighborhood. Someone matching your exact description." "My exact description?" Sam raised an eyebrow, his tone remaining professional despite the obvious implication. "Yeah," Brooks chimed in, emboldened by his partner's aggression. "Tall, black male, athletic build, wearing dark clothing. Ring any bells?" Sam glanced down at his navy blue running outfit, then back at the officers. "I see. And what exactly was this individual allegedly doing that was suspicious?" "Looking at houses," Johnson said, his chest puffing out. "Taking pictures. Acting like he didn't belong." "I live here," Sam replied simply, pointing toward his house 2 blocks away. 847, Maple Avenue. "I've been jogging this route for 8 years. Johnson laughed, a harsh sound devoid of humor. "Right. A guy like you lives in one of the most expensive houses in Georgetown. What are you, the gardener? Maybe the pool boy?" The racism was so blatant it took Sam's breath away. In 30 years of military service, he'd faced subtle bias, institutional challenges, and occasional ignorance. But this naked contempt was breathtaking in its audacity. "Officer Johnson," Sam said, reading the name tag, "I don't think it's appropriate for you to make assumptions about where I can or cannot live based on my race." "Race?" Brooks jumped in, his voice rising. "Who said anything about race? We're talking about facts. Economics. Reality. You know what houses cost in this zip code?" "About 1.2 million for a colonial like mine," Sam replied evenly. "I paid 1.3 because I liked the mature oak tree in the backyard." Johnson stepped closer, invading Sam's personal space. "Listen here, smart mouth. I don't know what game you're playing, but lying to police officers is a crime. So why don't you tell us the truth? Are you the help? Did someone send you to check on their house? Because there's no shame in honest work." The condescension was suffocating. Sam felt his military bearing kick in, spine straight, shoulders back, chin up. It was an unconscious response to disrespect that had served him well in countless confrontations with foreign adversaries. But these weren't foreign adversaries. They were American police officers, sworn to protect and serve, treating him like a criminal based solely on his skin color. "Officers, I've been respectful and cooperative," Sam said, his voice taking on the edge that made subordinates straighten up during briefings. "I've answered your questions. I've identified myself and my residence. What exactly do you want from me?" "We want the truth." Johnson exploded. "We want you to stop playing games and admit what you're really doing here. Nobody just jogs around neighborhoods this expensive unless they're planning something." A few neighbors had emerged from their houses, drawn by the raised voices. Mrs. Chin stood on her porch, her phone out and recording. The Martinez family watched from their front window. Sam could see recognition dawning on some faces, people who knew him, who were witnessing their neighbor being harassed. "May I see your badges and identification numbers?" Sam asked, his tone remaining professional but firm. This reasonable request seemed to enrage both officers. Brooks laughed mockingly. "Oh, look who thinks he's a lawyer now. You watch too much TV, buddy. We ask the questions here." "Actually," Sam replied, "every citizen has the right to identify the officers detaining them. It's basic constitutional law." Johnson's face flushed red. "Constitutional law? you think you can lecture us about the law? Let me tell you something, Professor, we are the law on this street. And right now, you look guilty as hell of something. Guilty of what, exactly? Being where you don't belong, Brooks snarled. Acting like you own the place when we all know you don't. The crowd of neighbors was growing. Someone called out, "Hey, leave Sam alone. He lives here." But Johnson whirled around, his hand moving to his weapon. "Back off. All of you. This is official police business." Sam watched the officers' body language, noting their increasing agitation, their isolation from community support, their obvious inexperience. They were digging themselves deeper with every word, every gesture, every assumption. As a military strategist, he could see exactly how this would end. But first, it was going to get much worse. Sam stood perfectly still, his hands visible, his posture non-threatening despite every instinct screaming at him to assert his authority. 30 years of military service had taught him to read situations quickly and respond strategically. Right now, the strategy was survival. These weren't trained soldiers following rules of engagement. These were young, aggressive civilians with guns and badges, operating on prejudice and adrenaline. One wrong move, one gesture they misinterpreted, and this encounter could turn deadly. He'd seen the statistics, read the reports, attended the Pentagon briefings about racial bias in civilian law enforcement. But his military bearing was impossible to completely suppress. Even in jogging clothes, even handcuffed, he carried himself with the unconscious authority of someone accustomed to command. It showed in his posture, his controlled breathing, his steady gaze that missed nothing and revealed calculated intelligence. Johnson noticed it too, and it irritated him. "You think you're better than us, don't you? Standing there all calm and collected, like you're judging us." Sam said nothing, but his mind was working rapidly. He catalogued every detail, Johnson's academy ring suggesting recent graduation, Brooks' nervous fidgeting indicating inexperience, the growing crowd of witnesses, the multiple phones recording from different angles. Most importantly, he noted their supervisor's absence. These were junior officers operating without oversight. His smartphone, tucked in his zippered pocket, had been automatically recording since the encounter began, a security feature he'd activated after a briefing about officer safety. His Apple Watch had sent an emergency alert to his wife's phone. His Ring doorbell camera at home was capturing audio. The digital evidence was already building. Brooks kept glancing at the crowd nervously. "Maybe we should call this in, Johnson. There's a lot of people watching." "Let them watch," Johnson replied, but Sam heard the slight uncertainty creeping into his voice. "They need to see what happens when people don't cooperate with law enforcement." Sam almost smiled at that. Non-cooperation. He'd been a model of compliance, answering questions he had no legal obligation to answer, providing information he wasn't required to give, remaining calm under provocation that would have sent most people into defensive rage. His military training had prepared him for interrogation by foreign enemies, for capture scenarios, for maintaining composure under extreme stress. Two inexperienced suburban cops didn't even register compared to what he'd endured in SEER school or during classified operations he couldn't discuss. But this was different. This wasn't about national security or military objectives. This was about something more fundamental, his right to exist peacefully in his own neighborhood without being presumed criminal based on his race. "Sir." A voice called from the crowd. It was Tom Patterson, a neighbor who worked at the State Department. "Sir, are you all right?" Johnson spun around. "I told you people to back off. This man is under investigation." "Investigation for what?" Patterson called back. "That's Commander Washington. He's lived here for years." Commander Washington. Close enough, Sam thought. At least someone recognized him, even if they got the rank wrong. The small mistake actually worked in his favor. It suggested familiarity without revealing the full extent of his position. "Commander?" Brooks looked confused. "Like, military?" Sam remained silent, letting the information percolate. Sometimes the most powerful move was not making a move at all. Let them draw their own conclusions, make their own mistakes. Johnson wasn't buying it. Commander of what? The local neighborhood watch. He laughed harshly. Nice try, but we're not that stupid. But Sam could see doubt creeping into Brooks' expression. The younger officer was beginning to realize that something about this situation didn't add up. The expensive neighborhood, the neighbor's recognition, the man's bearing and vocabulary, his absolute calm under pressure, none of it fit their initial assumptions. Mrs. Chin called out from her porch, "Officers, there's been a mistake. This gentleman is Samuel Washington. He's a naval officer. He lives at 847 Maple Avenue. Naval officer." The words hung in the air like a challenge. Johnson's jaw tightened, but Sam could see the first flicker of uncertainty in his eyes. Still, his pride wouldn't let him back down. "Lady, I don't care if he claims to be the president," Johnson snapped. "We have a job to do, and right now this man is acting suspicious." Sam finally spoke, his voice carrying the quiet authority that had commanded carrier battle groups in hostile waters. "Officer Johnson, I'm going to give you some advice. Check your radio. Call your supervisor. Ask them to run the name Samuel Washington through your system. Do it now, before this situation becomes something neither of us can control." The tone was unmistakable, not pleading, not threatening, but carrying the weight of absolute certainty. It was the voice of someone who knew exactly how this would end and was offering a lifeline. Johnson hesitated, his confidence wavering for the first time. Something in Sam's tone, combined with the growing crowd of witnesses and their obvious recognition of the man, was beginning to penetrate his arrogance. "You don't give us orders," he said, but the words lacked conviction. "I'm not giving orders," Sam replied calmly. "I'm giving advice. The kind of advice that might save your career." Brooks, increasingly uncomfortable with the situation, finally pulled out his radio. "Maybe we should check," he muttered to his partner. "Just to be sure." Johnson glared at him, but the doubt was spreading. The crowd was getting larger, phones were recording from multiple angles, and the man on the ground radiated a confidence that didn't match their narrative of a cornered criminal. "Fine," Johnson snarled. "But when this comes back clean, we're taking him in for obstruction and lying to a police officer." Brooks keyed his radio. "Dispatch, this is Unit 47. We need a background check on a Samuel Washington, address 847, Maple Avenue, Georgetown." The radio crackled. "Copy that, Unit 47. Stand by." Sam closed his eyes briefly, feeling the familiar calm that came before decisive action. Everything that happened next would be recorded, witnessed, and remembered. These officers were about to learn a lesson in assumptions that would follow them for the rest of their lives. The radio silence stretched for nearly a minute. Then Dispatcher Maria Santos' voice came back, tight with urgency. "Unit 47, can you confirm that name?" "Samuel Washington, Maple Avenue." "Confirmed," Brooks replied, glancing nervously at his partner. Another pause. Then, "Unit 47, you need to contact Sergeant Martinez immediately. Do not take any further action until you speak with your supervisor." Johnson grabbed the radio. "Dispatch, what's the status on this individual? Does he have a record?" "Unit 47. The dispatcher's voice was strained. "Patch through to Sergeant Martinez right now. This is priority 1. The radio crackled again, and then a new voice exploded through the speaker. "Sergeant Martinez," his voice tight with panic. "Johnson." "Brooks. What the hell is your location?" "We're on Maple Avenue with a suspicious person," Johnson replied, his bravado beginning to crack. "Jesus Christ." Martinez's voice was nearly a shout. "Tell me you did not just arrest Rear Admiral Samuel Washington. Tell me you did not just handcuff a goddamn Navy Rear Admiral." The words hit like a physical blow. Johnson's face went white. Brooks actually staggered backward. The radio fell from Johnson's nerveless fingers, clattering on the pavement. "Rear Admiral," Brooks whispered, his voice barely audible. Sam opened his eyes and looked directly at both officers. When he spoke, his voice carried the full weight of his rank, his authority, and his absolute command of the situation. "Officers," he said quietly, "I tried to warn you." Johnson was shaking now, the full magnitude of their mistake crashing down on him. You're really Rear Admiral Samuel Washington, United States Navy," Sam confirmed. "Commander of the 3rd Fleet. And you gentlemen have just committed assault on a federal officer." The crowd had gone silent, sensing the seismic shift in the encounter. Phone cameras captured every moment as the two officers realized their careers had just ended in spectacular fashion. Sergeant Martinez's voice continued to crackle from the radio, "I'm en route with the captain. Do not move. Do not speak. Do not breathe wrong. If the Admiral has so much as a scratch on him, we're all finished." Brooks was hyperventilating. "Sir, we didn't know, we thought." "You thought what?" Sam asked, his voice deadly calm. "You thought a black man couldn't live in this neighborhood? Couldn't be successful? Couldn't be trusted with authority?" Johnson tried to speak but no words came out. The handcuffs suddenly felt like they weighed 1,000 pounds. The knee that had been pressed into the Admiral's back felt like it had committed a war crime. "Uncuff me," Sam ordered, and this time there was no mistaking it for anything but a direct command from a superior officer. "Now." With trembling hands, Brooks fumbled for his keys. The handcuffs clicked open, and Sam slowly rose to his feet, brushing dirt from his jogging suit. Even in civilian clothes, even having been humiliated and assaulted, he somehow managed to look like exactly what he was, one of the most powerful military officers in the United States. The reckoning was about to begin. Within 3 minutes, the quiet Georgetown street transformed into a law enforcement convention. 2 patrol cars, a supervisor's SUV, and an unmarked sedan converged on Maple Avenue with lights flashing but sirens mercifully silent. Captain Rebecca Hayes emerged from the lead vehicle, her face a mask of barely controlled panic. Captain Hayes was a 20-year veteran who'd worked her way up through the ranks, earning respect through competence and professionalism. She'd handled everything from gang violence to domestic terrorism, but nothing had prepared her for the call she'd just received. 2 of her officers had assaulted a Navy Rear Admiral. She approached Sam directly, ignoring Johnson and Brooks entirely. "Admiral Washington, I am Captain Hayes, Montgomery County Police. On behalf of the entire department, I offer my sincerest apologies for this inexcusable incident." Sam straightened to his full height, and the transformation was remarkable. No longer was he the jogger being harassed by racist cops. He was Rear Admiral Samuel Washington, and his presence commanded the entire scene. "Captain Hayes," he acknowledged with a slight nod. "I appreciate your prompt response. However, apologies, while necessary, don't address the systemic issues that led to this incident." Hayes nodded grimly. "No sir, they don't. Sergeant Martinez, confiscate officers Johnson and Brooks' weapons and badges immediately. They are suspended without pay pending a full investigation." "Captain, please," Johnson found his voice, desperation creeping in. "We were just following protocol. We received reports." "What reports?" Hayes cut him off sharply. "I've checked dispatch. There were no calls about suspicious activity on Maple Avenue today. None." The lie crumbled instantly. Brooks looked like he might vomit. Johnson's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. Sam watched the exchange with the detached interest of someone who'd seen many subordinates face consequences for poor judgment. "Captain, I'd like to review those alleged reports myself. I'm curious about their specific nature and timing." "Of course, Admiral. Though I suspect that review will be brief, since they don't exist." The crowd of neighbors had grown to nearly 30 people. Tom Patterson from the State Department had arrived, along with Dr. Jennifer Kim from the Naval Research Facility at Georgetown University. Word was spreading through the community that their neighbor Sam was far more than the quiet military man they'd known. Mrs. Chen approached hesitantly. "Admiral Washington. I had no idea. I mean, I knew you were military, but..." Sam turned to her with a gentle smile, the first genuine warmth he'd shown since the ordeal began. "Mrs. Chen, I'm still just Sam, your neighbor. The uniform doesn't change that. But it did change things, and everyone knew it." The two officers who'd been so confident in their authority now stood stripped of their weapons and badges, facing the end of their careers and possible federal charges. Captain Hayes continued her damage control. "Admiral, we'll need a full statement, but I want you to know that the department will cooperate completely with any federal investigation. This incident will be thoroughly reviewed at the highest levels." "I expect nothing less," Sam replied. "But Captain, I'm less concerned about punishment than I am about prevention. How many other citizens have been treated this way by your officers? How many didn't have rank and witnesses to protect them?" The question hung in the air like an indictment. Hayes knew the statistics, knew the complaints, knew the pattern of racial profiling that departments across the country struggled with. Sergeant Martinez, a 15-year veteran with a spotless record, approached Johnson and Brooks. "Turn in your equipment. Report to headquarters for processing. And gentlemen, get lawyers. You're going to need them." Johnson made one last desperate attempt. "Sergeant, we were just doing our jobs. How were we supposed to know?" "Know what?" Martinez exploded. "Know that you shouldn't assault citizens. Know that you shouldn't make assumptions based on race. Know that you should treat people with basic human dignity." Sam held up a hand, and remarkably, the entire scene quieted. It was a glimpse of the authority he wielded in military settings, the ability to command attention and respect through presence alone. "Officers Johnson and Brooks," he said, his voice carrying across the crowd. "You made assumptions about me based on my race. You escalated a non-existent situation into violence. You lied about receiving reports to justify your actions. These aren't mistakes, they're choices." He paused, looking directly at each officer. "I've commanded thousands of sailors, many of them young men like yourselves. I've seen good people make bad decisions, and I've seen how those decisions can define entire careers. Today, you made choices that will follow you for the rest of your lives." Johnson was crying now, the full weight of his actions crushing down on him. Brooks stared at the ground, unable to meet anyone's eyes. "But," Sam continued, "I also believe in redemption. I hope you'll use this experience to become better men, even if you're no longer police officers." Captain Hayes watched in amazement as the Admiral somehow managed to find grace even in the aftermath of his own assault. It was a masterclass in leadership, and it made the officer's behavior look even more inexcusable by contrast. The two former officers were led away to separate patrol cars, their law enforcement careers over before they'd really begun. The crowd began to disperse, neighbors approaching Sam to offer support and express their shock at what they'd witnessed. But the real reckoning was just beginning. The video footage from the incident went viral within hours. Multiple angles from neighbors' phones, security cameras, and even the officers' own body cameras told the complete story of racial profiling, excessive force, and the stunning revelation of the victim's identity. #Admiral Washington and #Georgetown incident began trending nationally. By evening, the story had reached major news networks. CNN, Fox News, MSNBC, and NPR all led with variations of the same headline: Navy Rear Admiral assaulted by police in racist attack. The irony wasn't lost on commentators. One of America's highest-ranking naval officers, a man trusted with nuclear weapons and billion-dollar military assets, deemed suspicious for jogging in his own neighborhood. Sam sat in his study that evening, fielding calls from Pentagon officials, congressional representatives, and Navy leadership. His phone hadn't stopped ringing since the incident. The Secretary of the Navy had called personally to express outrage. The Chief of Naval Operations wanted a full briefing. 3 different congressional committees requested his testimony. But the call that mattered most came from his wife, Commander Sarah Washington, who was cutting short her own deployment to return home. "Sam," her voice was tight with emotion, "I saw the video. Are you hurt?" "Physically, I'm fine," he replied, unconsciously rubbing his wrists where the handcuffs had cut into skin. "But Sarah, if I hadn't been who I am, if those neighbors hadn't recognized me, if I hadn't had rank to shield me." "I know," she said quietly. "How many others don't have that protection?" It was the question that had haunted him all day. The incident had ended with apologies and consequences for the officers involved, but only because of his position. How many other citizens faced the same treatment without recourse? The next morning brought a press conference at the Pentagon. Sam, now in full dress uniform with ribbons and stars clearly visible, stood behind a podium flanked by Navy leadership. The visual contrast with the previous day's jogging clothes was stark and intentional. "Yesterday, I was assaulted by police officers while jogging in my neighborhood," he began, his voice steady but carrying an undercurrent of controlled anger. "This incident wasn't about me personally. It was about assumptions, prejudice, and the dangerous intersection of racial bias and unchecked authority." He paused, looking directly into the cameras. "I wear this uniform in service to all Americans. I've commanded sailors of every race, religion, and background. I've seen what unity and mutual respect can accomplish. What happened yesterday represents everything we're supposed to be protecting against." The questions from reporters were sharp and focused. How often had he faced similar treatment? What reforms would he recommend? Would he file federal charges? "I will cooperate fully with any investigation," Sam replied. "But my focus isn't on punishment, it's on prevention. We need comprehensive police reform, bias training, and accountability measures that protect all citizens, not just those with enough rank or privilege to demand justice." Behind the scenes, the political machinery was already moving. Congressional hearings were scheduled. The Justice Department announced a pattern and practice investigation of Montgomery County Police. Reform advocates pointed to the incident as proof that racial bias transcended economic and social boundaries. But Sam also received criticism from unexpected quarters. Some military colleagues suggested he should have identified himself immediately. Conservative commentators argued he was playing the race card. Social media filled with debates about privilege, authority, and whether his rank made the incident more or less significant. The most meaningful response came from Montgomery County's black community. Pastor Williams from First Baptist Church called to invite Sam to speak to young men who'd faced similar treatment without his protections. Community organizer Maria Santos wanted to discuss police accountability measures. High school students asked him to speak at their assembly about dignity and justice. 3 weeks later, Sam stood before the Senate Judiciary Committee, still in uniform, still carrying the authority of his rank. But now he spoke not just as a military officer, but as a citizen who'd experienced the reality that millions of Americans faced every day. "Senators," he concluded his testimony, "the question isn't whether I deserved better treatment because of my rank. The question is whether every American deserves the basic dignity and respect that was denied to me that day. If we can't answer yes to that question, then the uniform I wear and the values it represents don't mean what we claim they do." The incident became a catalyst for meaningful reform in Montgomery County and beyond. Sam used his platform to push for changes that protected all citizens, not just those with stars on their shoulders. As he often told audiences in the months that followed, respect shouldn't require a uniform or a title. It should be the birthright of every American citizen. The comment sections on every platform where his story was shared became spaces for meaningful dialogue about race, justice, and respect, proving that even in our divided times, truth and dignity could still spark change. What started as a routine jog had become a national conversation about who deserves respect in America. The answer, Sam insisted, was everyone.